You know what's crazy? Sometimes the people who create you are the last people who deserve to know you. And honey, let me tell you about the day I walked into a $60 million penthouse in Manhattan. Only to have my own biological mother look me dead in the eyes and say, "Security will escort you out if you think you're getting a dime from us." But here's the kicker, she had nitrogen monoxide idea that in about 15 minutes, her world was about to get flipped upside down when my daughter walked through that door. And trust me, when I say my daughter is famous, I mean famous. Like, paparazzi following her to Starbucks famous. Like, her face on billboards in Times Square famous. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and tell you how a 62-year-old woman from Detroit ended up face-to-face with parents who threw her away like yesterday's newspaper, only to discover they'd been living like royalty while I was working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. If you're wondering how this story ends, stick around, because honey, justice has never tasted so sweet. 3 months ago, I finally did something I'd been putting off for 40 years. I took one of those ancestry DNA tests. Not because I was curious about my heritage or anything romantic like that. No, I did it because my doctor kept asking about family medical history, and all I could tell him was, "Doc, your guess is as good as mine." The results came back faster than I expected. Turns out, my birth parents weren't some teenage kids who made a mistake. Oh no. My biological father was Marcus Sterling, you know, the Marcus Sterling who owns half the luxury hotels on the East Coast. And my mother, Helena Sterling, whose family basically owns the diamond industry in America. I'm talking about people worth over $3 billion. While I was getting evicted from apartments and choosing between groceries and electricity bills. These people were probably spending more on wine than I made in 5 years. But here's what really got me. The DNA service didn't just give me names, it gave me their current address. A penthouse apartment on 5th Avenue that, according to Google, was worth more than some people's entire net worth. And suddenly, 40 years of wondering turned into this burning need to know why does a woman give birth and then act like that child never existed? Why does a man with enough money to buy small countries never once wonder about the daughter he helped create? I needed answers, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where to get them. Now, let me paint you a picture of what my life looked like while I was planning this little family reunion. I work as a custodian at Detroit Metro Airport, the overnight shift, because that's what pays the most. I live in a studio apartment where the heat works when it feels like it. And my biggest luxury is the premium cable package I treat myself to every month. Meanwhile, my daughter Zara, and yes, that's her real name, Zara Williams, is out in Los Angeles living her absolute best life. She's been on the cover of Vogue 3 times this year alone. Her last movie made over $200 million worldwide. When she posts a selfie, it gets 5 million likes before she even finishes typing the caption. The contrast is insane, right? But here's the thing about Zara, success never changed her heart. Every Sunday morning at 9 a.m. sharp, my phone rings. It's her, calling from whatever fancy hotel or movie set she's at, just to check on me. She sends me flowers on random Tuesdays just because. She offered to buy me a house in Beverly Hills, and when I said no, she didn't push. She just hugged me and said, "Mom, your independence is one of the things I love most about you. That's my baby." Famous or not, she's still the little girl who Used to make me breakfast in bed using plastic play, kitchen utensils, and tell me I was the most beautiful woman in the world. So when I decided I was going to confront Marcus and Helena Sterling, Zara was the first person I called. Mom, she said, and I could hear the concern in her voice even through the phone. Are you sure about this? These people abandon you. They don't deserve to see the incredible woman you became, but I had to know. After 62 years of wondering, of making up stories in my head about who they were and why they made their choice, I needed to look them in the eyes and get my answers. Baby, I told her, I've spent my whole life wondering if I was worth keeping. I need to know if they ever regretted letting me go. What I didn't tell her was that I also needed to know if they'd think I was worth knowing. Now, getting access to billionaires isn't exactly like knocking on your neighbor's door. I had to hire a private investigator named Tony Marcelli. Cost me 2 months of overtime pay, but he was worth every penny. Tony specialized in what he called high net worth family reunifications. Basically, he helped people like me figure out how to approach people like them without getting arrested for trespassing. Mrs. Williams, Tony told me over coffee at a diner that probably cost less than what the Sterlings spend on lunch every day, I need you to understand something. When you have that kind of money, you don't trust anyone. They're going to assume you want something from them. I do want something, I replied. I want to know why they gave me away. Tony leaned back in his booth, studying me with those sharp investigator eyes. And if they think that's code for I want money? I shrugged. Then I guess I'll know what kind of people they really are. It took Tony 6 weeks to even get a response from their assistant. 6 weeks to acknowledge that their biological daughter existed and wanted to meet them. When the call finally came, it wasn't from Marcus or Helena directly. Oh no, that would be too personal. It was from someone named Ms. Patricia Chen, Helena's executive assistant. Mrs. Sterling can accommodate a brief meeting, Ms. Chen informed me in a voice so crisp it could cut glass. 30 minutes, Thursday at 2 p.m. Security will need to verify your identification. And I should mention that Mr. and Mrs. Sterling's attorney will be present, their attorney. I was trying to meet my birth parents, and they were treating it like a hostile business negotiation. But fine. If that's how they wanted to play it, I could play it too. The Sterling penthouse building had a doorman who looked like he moonlighted as a bouncer for exclusive nightclubs. The lobby had marble floors that probably cost more than my annual salary. And the elevator required a special key just to reach the top floor. When those elevator doors opened, I stepped into a world I'd only seen in magazines. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, art that I was pretty sure belonged in museums. Furniture that looked like it was afraid to be sat on. And standing in the middle of all this luxury, waiting for me, were my birth parents. Marcus Sterling was 78 years old, but he carried himself like a man who'd never known a day of real struggle in his life. Perfectly tailored suit, silver hairstyle just so, and eyes that sized me up like I was a business proposition he was already planning to reject. Helena Sterling made him look warm by comparison. She was elegant in that way that only comes from a lifetime of having other people handle life's inconveniences for you. Her jewelry probably cost more than most people's cars, and she wore it like armor. Dorothy Williams, Marcus said, not moving from his position by the windows, not offering to shake my hand, not even a polite smile. Just my name, like he was confirming I was the right person to dismiss. Asterisk, that's me, I replied, looking around the room one more time. Nice place you've got here. Helena made a sound that might have been amusement if it had come from anyone else. Please, sit, she said, gesturing toward a chair that was positioned like I was about to be interrogated. Their attorney, a thin man named Harold Finch, who'd introduced himself like he was announcing the guest speaker at a funeral, had already set up a recorder on the coffee table. I trust you. Don't mind, Helena said, following my gaze to the device. We prefer to keep records of conversations that might be misconstrued later. Misconstrued. I hadn't even sat down, and they were already treating me like I was there to blackmail them. Fine by me, I said, settling into the chair and crossing my legs. I've got nothing to hide. Do you? The question hung in the air like smoke. Harold Finch shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Marcus cleared his throat. Helena's perfectly composed expression flickered for just a moment. What exactly do you want from us? Marcus asked, getting straight to the point. I want to know why, I said simply. Why you gave me away. Why you never looked back. Why you acted like I never existed. Helena's laugh was sharp and humorless. We were young. We weren't ready for children. We made the responsible choice by placing you with people who could provide what you needed. The responsible choice. I repeated. You want to know what my life looked like after your responsible choice. I pulled out my phone and showed them a picture of my first apartment, a roach-infested studio where the previous tenant had apparently been a chain smoker with a pet that wasn't house-trained. This was home when I was 22. No family to co-sign for anything better. No financial help for college. No safety net when things got tough. I swiped to the next photo. This was my daughter's first bed. A dresser drawer with blankets, because I couldn't afford a crib. Marcus had the decency to look uncomfortable. Helena's expression didn't change. We assumed you'd be placed with a suitable family, she said coolly. People who wanted children. Oh, I was placed all right. With the Johnsons, a lovely couple in their 60s who took in kids for the monthly check from the state. 7 of us in a 3-bedroom house, and Mrs. Johnson made it very clear that we were there to help pay her bills, not to be treated like family. Harold Finch was scribbling notes like my childhood trauma was evidence he might need later. I'm sorry you had difficulties, Marcus said. But his tone suggested he was about as sorry as someone apologizing for bumping into you on the subway. But that doesn't change the fact that we made our decision based on what we believed was best at the time. Best for who? I asked, my voice rising slightly. Best for me, or best for your bank account? Helena's eyes flashed. That's quite enough. We didn't invite you here to be accused of selfishness by someone who clearly wants, what do I want? I interrupted. Go ahead, finish that sentence. Tell me what you think I want from you. The silence stretched between us like a challenge. Finally, Helena spoke. Money, she said simply. They always want money. They, like I was part of some category of people who made a habit of tracking down rich relatives. You know what's funny? I said, leaning back in my chair. You're absolutely right. I do want something from you. But it's not what you think. Marcus and Helena exchanged glances. Harold Finch looked up from his notes with interest. I want you to look at me, really look at me, and tell me if you see anything worth regretting. I stood up slowly, letting them take in the woman their decision had created. My work-worn hands, my off-the-rack dress, my shoes that had been resold twice because I couldn't afford new ones. I want you to look at What I became despite your responsible choice, and tell me if you're proud or ashamed. Marcus opened his mouth to respond. But that's when we heard the elevator ding. Helena frowned. We're not expecting anyone else. The sound of heels clicking on marble grew louder, and then a voice that millions of people around the world would recognize called out, "Mom? Where are you?" I watched Marcus and Helena's faces change as Zara Williams walked into their living room like she owned the place. And in that moment, watching their expressions shift from confusion to recognition to absolute shock, I knew this meeting was about to become something neither of them had prepared for. My daughter looked like she'd stepped off a red carpet and into their living room by accident. She was wearing what I knew was a casual outfit by her standards, designer jeans that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and a simple black sweater that somehow made her look like she should be on the cover of a magazine. "Sorry I'm late," Zara said, kissing my cheek before turning to face my birth parents with that smile that had made her famous. Flight from London was delayed, and then I had to convince the doorman that yes, I was supposed to be here. She extended her hand to Marcus first. "Zara Williams. I'm Dorothy's daughter." Marcus Sterling, a man who probably negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, just stared at her like his brain had short-circuited. "Your daughter," he repeated slowly. "That's right," Zara said, her smile never wavering as she turned to Helena. "Which makes me your granddaughter, I suppose. Though I have to say, this isn't quite how I imagined our first meeting going." Helena had gone completely pale. But you're black," Zara finished pleasantly. "Yeah, I get that reaction sometimes. It's almost like people forget that adoption exists." The silence in the room was deafening. Harold Finch had stopped taking notes and was just staring. Marcus looked like he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. And Helena looked like someone had just told her that everything she thought she knew about the world was wrong. "I don't understand," Marcus said finally. "Dorothy, you said this was your daughter, but what?" Zara asked, settling into a chair beside me with the kind of grace that comes from years of media training. "You assumed she had a white daughter. Or you assumed she couldn't possibly have raised someone successful enough to be sitting in your living room." The question hit the room like a slap. Marcus struggled for words. "Let me help you out," Zara said, crossing her legs and leaning back like she was getting comfortable for a long conversation. "You gave away a daughter 62 years ago, assuming she'd disappear into whatever life you decided was appropriate for an inconvenient baby. You never wondered what happened to her, never cared enough to find out if she was happy or successful or even alive." She gestured around the penthouse. "Meanwhile, you've been living like royalty, probably telling people you have no children, while the daughter you threw away was working 3 jobs to raise a kid who would grow up to be more successful than you probably ever dreamed." Helena found her voice first. "We had no way of knowing. You had every way of knowing." Zara cut her off, her famous smile disappearing for the first time since she'd walked in. "You could have hired the same private investigator we used to find you. You could have checked on her at any point in the last 6 decades. You chose not to." She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through it with the kind of casual confidence that made it clear she was about to make a point. "Want to know what I found when I looked into your family?" she asked, not waiting for an answer. Sterling Hotels donated $12 million to children's charities last year alone. $12 million. To help disadvantaged kids find stable homes and educational opportunities. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. We believe in giving back. You donated millions to help kids who were abandoned, Zara continued, while refusing to acknowledge the kid you actually abandoned. The irony is just wow, she kept scrolling through her phone. And I could see Harold Finch getting nervous about whatever she was about to reveal next. But here's my favorite part, Zara said, her smile returning with a sharp edge. According to your tax records, which are public, by the way, when you donate that much money, you've been claiming these charitable donations for decades. Since about 1963, actually. 5 years after my mom was born. The color drained from Helena's face. How did I get access to tax records? Honey, when you're worth what I'm worth, you have accountants and lawyers and financial advisors who know how to find information. And what they found is fascinating. Zara stood up and began walking around the room, examining their art collection like she was giving herself a private tour. Turns out, you two have been claiming massive tax deductions for helping abandoned children for over 50 years. Millions and millions of dollars in tax breaks, all while pretending your own abandoned child didn't exist. She stopped in front of a painting that probably cost more than most people's houses. My financial advisor calls it philanthropic laundering. You get to look like generous humanitarians while paying less in taxes. And all it cost you was acknowledging that the child you created actually existed. Harold Finch was frantically scribbling notes now. Marcus looked like he was about to be sick. Helena just sat there, staring at Zara like she was seeing a ghost. There's more, Zara said, returning to her seat. My team also looked into your family trust. You know, the one that controls all those hotels and investments and properties. Marcus's voice came out as barely a whisper. What about it? Well, according to the original trust documents, filed in 1955. Interestingly enough, 3 years before my mom was born, any biological children are automatically entitled to equal shares of family assets upon verification of parentage. The room went completely silent except for the sound of Harold Finch's pen dropping to the floor. Equal shares, Zara repeated slowly, like she was savoring the words. Which means my mom isn't just your long-lost daughter. She's your business partner. Whether you want her to be or not. Helena made a choking sound. That's impossible. We would have changed those provisions years ago if you'd remembered they existed. Zara finished. Yeah, my lawyers thought you might say that. But here's the thing about family trusts set up in the 1950s, they're almost impossible to modify without unanimous consent from all beneficiaries. She looked directly at Helena. And since you've spent 62 years pretending my mom didn't exist, she never consented to being written out of anything. Marcus stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped over. This is extortion. This is genetics, Zara replied calmly. My mom is your biological daughter. The trust your own father set up recognizes biological children as beneficiaries. She has as much legal right to sterling family assets as you do. She can't just walk in here and claim, Helena started. She's not claiming anything, Zara interrupted. I am, on her behalf. Because unlike you, I actually care about what happens to my family. Harold Finch had recovered his pen and was writing so fast his hand was probably cramping. This would require extensive legal review, he said weakly. Already done, Zara replied, pulling a thick folder from her purse. My legal team has been very thorough. DNA evidence, birth records, trust documentation, legal precedent, it's all here. She set the folder on the coffee table with a soft thud that somehow sounded louder than a slam. According to our calculations, my mom is entitled to approximately 1/3 of all Sterling family assets. That's roughly. What did they estimate, Mom? I looked at the folder, then at these two people who'd spent decades acting like I didn't exist. $1.2 billion. The silence that followed was the kind of quiet you hear right before something explodes. Helena's hands were shaking now. We can't. The business partnerships alone would survive just fine, Zara said. In fact, they'd probably improve. My mom has more real-world experience than both of you combined. She knows what it's like to work for a living, to struggle, to build something from nothing. She gestured toward me with obvious pride. She raised me as a single mother while working multiple jobs, put herself through community college at night, and still managed to raise a daughter who became successful enough to sit in this room and demand you treat her with respect. Marcus sank back into his chair like all the air had gone out of him. What do you want from us? I want you to acknowledge that she exists, Zara said simply. I want you to admit that giving her away was wrong. And I want you to make it right. How? Helena whispered. Zara's smile returned, but this time it was warm instead of sharp. By becoming the parents she deserved to have 62 years ago. She looked at me, then back at them. My mom doesn't want your money. She never did. What she wants is what every abandoned child wants, to know that she mattered. That giving her away wasn't easy for you. That you've regretted it every single day since. Helena's composure finally cracked completely. Tears started rolling down her cheeks, taking her perfect makeup with them. We did regret it, she whispered. Every day. But we told ourselves it was too late to fix it. It's never too late, Zara said softly. But it starts with admitting you were wrong. Marcus looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since I'd walked into his penthouse. Dorothy, you threw me away, I said, my voice steady despite the tears I could feel coming. You created me, carried me for 9 months, gave birth to me, and then acted like I never existed. I stood up and walked to those floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at Central Park where people were living their lives without billion-dollar trust funds or abandoned children or family reunions that felt like business negotiations. Do you know what that does to a person? I continued, not turning around. Spending your whole life wondering if you were worth keeping. Wondering what was wrong with you that your own parents couldn't love you? I turned back to face them. I've spent 62 years trying to prove I was worth something. Working myself to exhaustion, sacrificing everything to make sure my daughter never felt unwanted. Never wondered if she mattered. Zara moved to stand beside me, and I felt her hand slip into mine. And you know what the crazy part is? I continued. I succeeded. I raised an incredible daughter who became more successful than either of you ever dreamed of being. I built a life that meant something, touched people's lives, made a difference in the world. Helena was crying openly now. Marcus looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. I don't need your money, I said. I don't need your approval. What I need is for you to understand that the biggest mistake of your lives wasn't getting pregnant with me. It was deciding I wasn't worth loving. The silence stretched on until Zara spoke. Here's what's going to happen, she said in the tone that had probably convinced movie directors to give her leading roles. You're going to set up a foundation. The Dorothy Williams Foundation for Foster Children. You're going to fund it with exactly the amount my mom is legally entitled to from the family trust. Harold Finch looked up from his notes. That would be $1.2 billion, Zara finished. Every penny she's legally entitled to, used to help kids who are going through what she went through. Marcus found his voice. And if we refuse? Then my next phone call is to my publicist, Zara replied without hesitation. And my mom's story becomes very public very quickly. Billionaires who abandoned their daughter and spent decades denying she existed while claiming tax breaks for helping other people's abandoned children. She pulled out her phone and showed them something on the screen. I already have interview requests from 3 major networks and to streaming documentaries. The story of how Dorothy Williams went from foster care to raising one of Hollywood's biggest stars while her billionaire birth parents pretended she didn't exist. Helena made another choking sound. The publicity would destroy everything we've built. Maybe, Zara agreed. Or maybe it would show the world that sometimes the people who abandon their children don't deserve the lives those children could have given them. She put her phone away and looked at both of them directly. Your choice. You can do the right thing quietly, with dignity, and maybe start building a relationship with the incredible woman you threw away. Or you can do it publicly, Vasily. And spend the rest of your lives explaining to the world why you never thought she was worth knowing. Marcus and Helena looked at each other with the kind of communication that comes from decades of marriage. Finally, Marcus spoke. Dorothy, he said, his voice softer than it had been all afternoon. Would you be willing to tell us about your life? About who you became after you abandoned me? I finished. He nodded, looking ashamed for the first time since I'd walked in. I looked at these 2 people who shared my DNA but had never shared my struggles, my triumphs, my fears, or my dreams. They wanted to know who I'd become without them. I became a mother, I said simply. The kind of mother who would never, ever give up a child because it was inconvenient. The kind of mother who worked 3 jobs to make sure her daughter never went hungry. The kind of mother who believed that love was more important than money, that family was about showing up, not about blood. I gestured toward Zara. I became the mother of a woman who is more successful, more generous, and more loving than either of you could ever hope to be. Helena's tears were flowing freely now. We were wrong, she whispered. We were so wrong. Yes, I agreed. You were. Can you ever forgive us? Marcus asked. I considered the question for a long moment. Could I forgive 2 people who'd spent 62 years acting like I didn't exist? Could I forgive the pain, the wondering, the feeling of being unwanted that had shaped every day of my life? I don't know, I said honestly. But I'm willing to try. If you're willing to earn it. Zara squeezed my hand. So what's it going to be? She asked them. Are you going to step up and be the grandparents I never had? Or are you going to keep pretending we don't exist? Helena wiped her eyes with a handkerchief that probably cost more than my weekly groceries. What would we need to do? Start by admitting you were wrong, Zara said. Publicly. Not because you have to, but because it's the right thing to do. And then? Marcus asked. And then you try to build a relationship with the daughter you gave away, I said. Not because she's entitled to your money, but because she's your daughter. Because family isn't about convenience or timing or what's best for business. It's about love. Harold Finch cleared his throat nervously. This would require extensive legal documentation, then start documenting. Zara cut him off. Because this conversation is over. Either you do the right thing, or we do it for you. She stood up and helped me gather my purse. We'll give you 48 hours to decide. After that, the story goes public whether you cooperate or not. As we walked toward the elevator, Helena called out, "Dorothy." "Wait." I turned around. "I know this doesn't change anything," she said, her voice breaking. "But I want you to know that not giving you away was the hardest thing I've ever done. And not a day has passed that I haven't wondered what kind of woman you became." "Now you know," I replied. "I became the kind of woman who would never abandon her child." The elevator doors closed on their shocked faces, and as we descended from their ivory tower back to the real world, Zara squeezed my hand. "You okay, Mom?" I thought about the question. Was I okay? I just confronted the people who'd shaped my entire life by their absence. I'd learned that I was worth more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I'd seen my famous daughter reduce billionaires to tears just by standing up for me. "Yeah, baby," I said, smiling at this incredible woman who called me Mom. "I'm more than okay. I'm proud that even though they gave me away, somehow I managed to become exactly the kind of mother they could never be." The elevator opened onto the marble lobby, and as we walked past the doorman who'd looked at me like I didn't belong, Zara whispered, "By the way, Mom, there's something I didn't tell them upstairs." "What's that?" She grinned. "I lied about the 48 hours. The story goes public tomorrow morning whether they cooperate or not. I already gave the exclusive to Good Morning America." I stared at her. "Zara Williams, you are your mother's daughter." "Damn right I am," she replied. "And that's something to be proud of." 2 days later, Marcus and Helena Sterling held a press conference announcing the establishment of the Dorothy Williams Foundation for Foster Children, funded with $1.2 billion and dedicated to ensuring that no child ever has to wonder if they're worth loving. They also announced that they were proud to welcome their daughter Dorothy and granddaughter Zara into their family, and that they deeply regretted the 62 years it took them to realize that family isn't about convenience, it's about love. I watched the press conference from my little studio apartment in Detroit, surrounded by flowers that Zara had sent and cards from friends who were proud of me for finally getting my answers. Did I forgive Marcus and Helena Sterling? That's still a work in progress. But did I learn something important about family, about worth, and about the difference between the people who create you and the people who choose to love you? Absolutely. And you know what the best part is? I already had everything I needed. I just needed to see the look on their faces when they realized what they'd given up. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's becoming so successful that the people who didn't want you realize they missed out on knowing someone extraordinary. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've ever felt unwanted, unworthy, or like you didn't matter, I want you to know something. Your worth isn't determined by the people who couldn't see it. It's determined by what you do with the love you choose to give and receive, and sometimes, just sometimes, the family you build is so much better than the family you were born into that even billionaires end up wishing they'd made different choices. Now that's what I call a happy ending.